They say humans are social creatures. The phrase is repeated so often it begins to feel like a rule of nature. Connection is considered healthy. Crowds are considered normal. And solitude is often misunderstood. But what if the quiet person sitting alone is not lonely at all? What if the one who prefers long walks without conversation, peaceful evenings without noise, and thoughts without interruption, is not avoiding people, but protecting something deeper? There is a strange assumption in society that those who enjoy their own company must be sad, withdrawn, or broken. But psychology suggests something far more interesting. What if solitude is not emptiness, but clarity? Why do some people feel energized by silence while others fear it? What happens inside the mind that finds comfort in being alone? And what hidden strengths often exist behind a person who does not constantly seek company? There is a quiet psychology behind people who enjoy their own presence. Today, that quiet world will be gently explored. Let's begin. There is a quiet moment that many people overlook. It happens when the noise of the day fades, when conversations end, when the world becomes still. For some people, this moment feels uncomfortable. Silence stretches too wide. The mind begins searching for distraction, a message to answer, a voice to hear, a screen to fill the quiet space. But for others, something entirely different happens. The silence feels gentle, almost like an exhale. This is the emotional landscape of someone who enjoys their own company. Solitude, for them, is not a void waiting to be filled. It is a room where the mind can finally stretch. Have you ever noticed how certain thoughts only appear when everything becomes quiet? Ideas that never surface in crowded rooms. Emotions that only reveal themselves when there is no audience. For people comfortable with solitude, this quiet space becomes deeply valuable. Because when the outside world grows still, the inner world begins to speak. And the inner world is rich. There are reflections that unfold slowly, like ripples on calm water. Memories revisited not with urgency, but curiosity. Questions explored without interruption. This is not loneliness. Loneliness carries a sharp edge, a feeling of absence, a sense that something essential is missing. But solitude carries a different emotional texture. It feels whole. In solitude, a person does not feel abandoned by the world. They feel temporarily released from it. The expectations fade. The social roles soften. The constant awareness of how one appears to others disappears. And in that absence of observation, something rare happens. Authenticity becomes easier. A person alone does not need to perform. There is no need to entertain, impress, or adjust. The mind moves freely, like a river no longer forced through narrow channels. Some people discover creativity in this space. Others discover emotional clarity. Some simply discover peace. Have you ever sat alone and suddenly realized how heavy constant interaction can feel? Not because people are unwelcome, but because the mind needs moments where it does not have to translate itself for anyone else. Solitude provides that space. It is a place where thoughts do not compete with conversation, where emotions are not filtered through social expectations. The person who enjoys their own company is not escaping connection. They are reconnecting with themselves. And in a world that rarely stops talking, that quiet reunion can feel profoundly comforting. A person who enjoys their own company is rarely created overnight. The comfort with solitude usually begins much earlier, long before adulthood, long before the language to explain it exists. Some children naturally drift toward quiet corners, not out of fear, but curiosity. While others run toward noise and activity, these children often sit and observe. They watch the room. They listen more than they speak. And inside their minds, something fascinating is unfolding. An inner world is forming. Psychology often refers to this as a temperament trait. Some nervous systems are simply wired to process stimulation more deeply. Sounds, conversations, emotions, and social cues are absorbed intensely. For such individuals, the world can feel very full, very quickly. Imagine standing in the middle of a busy marketplace. Voices overlapping. Colors everywhere. Movement in every direction. For some people, this energy feels exciting. For others, it feels overwhelming. Children who lean toward introspection often discover something important early in life. Quiet spaces feel safer for their minds. Not empty. Safe. Because in quiet environments, thoughts are allowed to settle like sediment in still water. Clarity appears where chaos once lived. Sometimes family environments shape this preference further. A child who grows up surrounded by noise, conflict, or emotional unpredictability may unconsciously seek solitude as a form of psychological balance. Solitude becomes a place where the nervous system can finally relax. But even in calm households, introspective children often gravitate toward activities that require depth rather than constant interaction. Reading, drawing, imagining stories, thinking about questions others may not notice. Why do people behave the way they do? Why do certain moments feel meaningful? These questions form quietly, like seeds in fertile soil. Over time, the child learns something subtle but powerful. Their inner world is interesting. Thoughts become companions. Reflection becomes familiar. Being alone does not feel empty. It feels occupied. And because of this, solitude stops feeling like isolation. It becomes a relationship. A relationship with one's own thoughts, feelings, and observations. Have you ever noticed how some people feel uncomfortable the moment they are alone, while others seem to settle into themselves with ease? That difference often begins early in life, shaped by temperament, environment, and the quiet discovery that the mind itself can be a fascinating place to spend time. For those who grow comfortable there, solitude stops being something to endure. It becomes something to return to. The human brain is not designed to operate the same way in every person. Some minds thrive in constant stimulation, voices overlapping, ideas bouncing between people, energy moving quickly from one interaction to the next. But other minds respond differently. For them, the brain processes the world more deeply, almost like a sponge absorbing every detail of an environment. Tone of voice, facial expressions, emotional shifts in a room. Nothing passes unnoticed. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as high sensory processing. The brain simply takes in more information before deciding what it means. And while this depth of perception can be powerful, it also requires something essential afterward: recovery. Silence. Imagine pouring water into a glass continuously without pause. Eventually the glass overflows. The same can happen inside the nervous system. Social environments contain enormous amounts of stimulation, conversation, eye contact, social expectations, emotional signals. For some people, these experiences are energizing. But for others, they slowly accumulate like weight on the mind. This is where solitude becomes restorative. When a person steps into quiet, the brain begins to shift into a different mode. The nervous system slows. The constant scanning of social cues relaxes. The mind finally has space to organize what it has absorbed. Neuroscience often refers to this as the default mode network, the state the brain enters when external demands fade. In this mode, something remarkable happens. The mind reflects. Memories reorganize. Insights appear. Thoughts that were once scattered begin to connect like pieces of a puzzle. Have you ever noticed how solutions to problems often arrive during quiet walks, showers, or moments of solitude? That is the brain thinking freely, no longer distracted by constant external input. For people who enjoy their own company, this mental environment feels natural. Quiet is not empty space. It is fertile ground. Ideas take root there. Creativity often grows there. Emotional clarity slowly emerges there. And perhaps most importantly, the brain begins to understand itself. Without constant noise, thoughts can finally be heard. In this quiet mental landscape, people often ask deeper questions about life, identity, and meaning. Not because they are withdrawn from the world, but because the absence of noise allows reflection to unfold naturally. The brain in solitude is not idle. It is exploring, connecting, understanding. And in that stillness, something rare happens in a fast-moving world. The mind begins to breathe. They are too quiet. They don't like people. They must be shy. These are common assumptions placed upon those who enjoy their own company. In a world that celebrates loud conversations, crowded rooms, and constant social activity, quiet personalities often become misunderstood. Silence is easily mistaken for distance. Calmness is mistaken for disinterest. Solitude is mistaken for loneliness. But these interpretations often miss the deeper truth. Because enjoying one's own company does not mean rejecting others. It simply means the mind does not rely on constant interaction to feel complete. Yet society tends to reward visibility. The person who speaks the most in the room is often considered confident. The one who socializes endlessly is considered well-adjusted. Meanwhile, the person who listens quietly may be labeled reserved or distant. But listening requires attention. Observation requires awareness. And many people who prefer solitude possess both in abundance. Have you ever noticed how the quiet person in a group often sees things others miss? A subtle shift in mood. A small tension in conversation. A detail in someone's expression that reveals more than words ever could. This depth of perception comes from watching carefully rather than constantly performing socially. However, misunderstanding can create subtle pressure. A person who enjoys solitude may occasionally feel the need to explain themselves. They may force extra conversation in social settings simply to appear normal. They may laugh louder than they feel, speak more than they wish, or attend gatherings that quietly drain their energy. Not because they dislike people, but because the world often equates silence with something being wrong. This misunderstanding can become exhausting, because a quiet personality is not empty space. It is simply a different rhythm. Where others think outwardly, they think inwardly. Where others process through conversation, they process through reflection. Neither approach is superior. They are simply different pathways through the same human experience. And yet, when quiet personalities are constantly misunderstood, they may begin to doubt themselves. Am I too distant? Should I be more outgoing? Why do I need more time alone than others? These questions often arise not because something is wrong, but because the surrounding culture rarely pauses to understand solitude. But the quiet mind is not lacking connection. It simply connects differently, more selectively, more deeply, and often with far greater attention. And behind that quiet presence, there is often a rich emotional and intellectual world that few people ever fully see. When a person enjoys their own company, something quietly powerful is often happening beneath the surface. Because solitude does not simply remove noise from the outside world. It amplifies the inside one. Within the mind of someone comfortable with solitude, thoughts rarely remain shallow. They travel deeper. Questions expand. Ideas linger longer than they would in constant conversation. And slowly, an inner world begins to form. Not imaginary in the childish sense, but richly reflective. In this inner space, experiences are examined carefully. Moments are replayed not with regret, but with curiosity. Why did that interaction feel meaningful? Why did that moment create discomfort? These questions move through the mind like gentle waves, shaping understanding over time. People who enjoy solitude often develop strong introspective awareness. They learn to observe their own emotions with unusual clarity. Instead of reacting immediately, they pause. They analyze. They notice patterns. And this self-observation gradually builds emotional depth. Have you ever noticed how some individuals seem unusually thoughtful when they speak? As if their words have already traveled through layers of reflection before reaching the surface. That is often the result of time spent alone with one's thoughts. Solitude provides a rare environment where the mind can wander without interruption. Creativity often flourishes there. Stories emerge. Ideas take shape. Questions about life, meaning, and identity quietly unfold. Many artists, philosophers, writers, and innovators throughout history have shared this same relationship with solitude. Not because they rejected people, but because silence allowed their thoughts to expand freely. In crowded environments, attention constantly moves outward. Conversations demand responses. Social cues require interpretation. The mind becomes busy managing interaction. But in solitude, the attention turns inward. This inward focus reveals layers of the self that might otherwise remain hidden. Memories are processed. Values become clearer. Emotions are understood rather than avoided. The inner world grows richer with time. And eventually, solitude begins to feel less like isolation and more like companionship. Because the mind itself becomes interesting company. The person who enjoys their own presence does not feel empty when alone. They feel engaged, thinking, imagining, reflecting, observing. There is movement inside the quiet. And in that quiet movement, something valuable develops: self-knowledge. A deeper understanding of who one is, what one values, and how one truly experiences the world. This inner world may not always be visible to others. It exists quietly beneath calm expressions and thoughtful pauses. But for the person who inhabits it, that world is vast. And solitude is the doorway that allows them to enter it. Even when someone deeply values solitude, there can still be an internal tension, because the world rarely slows down enough to understand it. Modern life celebrates constant interaction. Messages arrive endlessly. Social media rewards visibility. Workplaces often praise those who speak the most, network the most, and stay constantly engaged. In such an environment, someone who needs frequent solitude can begin to feel slightly out of rhythm with the world around them. Not broken, but different. There may be moments where the person wonders if something is wrong with their preference for quiet spaces. Why does a crowded gathering drain energy so quickly? Why does silence feel comforting rather than uncomfortable? Why does spending too much time around others create a quiet sense of mental fatigue? These questions often emerge because society rarely explains that solitude can be a psychological need. Instead, there is subtle pressure to appear constantly social. A person who declines invitations too often might be seen as distant. Someone who chooses a quiet evening over a busy event might be described as antisocial. Over time, these small social expectations can create internal conflict. The individual begins to negotiate between their natural rhythm and the world's expectations. Perhaps they attend gatherings even when their energy is already low. Perhaps they stay longer in conversations than they would naturally choose. Not because they dislike people, but because they fear being misunderstood. And yet, each time they return to solitude afterward, something familiar happens. Relief. The mind settles. The nervous system softens. Thoughts begin to organize themselves again. It becomes clear that solitude was never avoidance. It was restoration. But understanding this can take time. Because the quiet conflict is not only external, it also happens internally. The person may carry a subtle guilt for needing space. They may question whether their desire for quiet moments makes them distant from others. Yet the truth is more nuanced. People who value solitude often care deeply about connection. In fact, they may prefer fewer relationships precisely because they seek depth rather than quantity. A single meaningful conversation may matter more than dozens of casual ones. And when connection does happen, it is often sincere, attentive, and emotionally present. Solitude does not remove the need for people. It simply protects the mental energy required to truly appreciate them. The quiet conflict slowly resolves when a person begins to accept their natural rhythm. When they realize that needing time alone is not withdrawal from life, but a way of returning to it with clarity. For a long time, solitude has been misunderstood as a weakness. The quiet person is often assumed to be missing something: confidence, social ability, or emotional openness. But psychology often reveals a different truth. The ability to enjoy one's own company can be a profound form of strength. Because when a person is comfortable alone, they are no longer dependent on constant validation from the outside world. Their sense of self does not rely entirely on attention, approval, or presence of others. Instead, stability begins to form internally. Have you ever noticed how difficult it can be for some people to spend even a short period of time alone? Silence feels unsettling. Thoughts become uncomfortable. Distractions are quickly sought. But the person who has learned to sit peacefully with themselves has developed something rare: emotional self-sufficiency. Not isolation. Not detachment. But the quiet ability to exist without needing constant reassurance. Solitude often becomes the place where personal clarity develops. In quiet moments, people begin to notice what they truly think rather than what they are expected to think. Values become clearer. Boundaries become stronger. Identity becomes less influenced by external noise. And from this clarity, independence begins to grow. The individual becomes less easily pulled by trends, opinions, or social pressure. Not because they resist others intentionally, but because they have already spent time understanding themselves. There is also creativity hidden inside solitude. Many ideas require silence before they can form. Many insights appear only when the mind is not busy reacting to constant stimulation. Writers often describe their best ideas emerging during long quiet hours. Scientists report moments of discovery arriving during solitary reflection. Artists frequently speak about the importance of being alone with their imagination. Solitude creates the mental space where thoughts can wander freely, forming connections that might otherwise remain hidden. But perhaps the greatest strength developed through solitude is self-awareness. The person who regularly spends time alone becomes familiar with their own emotions. They notice subtle changes in their mood. They understand what brings peace and what creates tension. This awareness builds emotional maturity. Because when someone understands themselves deeply, they are less likely to react blindly to the world around them. They respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. And that quiet steadiness often becomes a source of calm for others as well. What once appeared to be distance is revealed to be something else entirely. A mind that has learned how to stand comfortably in its own presence. There is a kind of peace that only appears when a person becomes comfortable in their own presence. Not the silence of isolation, but the silence of ease. It is the quiet feeling that nothing needs to be added to this moment for it to feel complete. No conversation required. No performance expected. No role to maintain. Just a human being, existing with themselves. For someone who has learned to appreciate solitude, this peace becomes familiar. It may appear during a slow walk where thoughts drift naturally. It may appear in the stillness of a quiet evening when the world outside grows calm. It may appear while reading, reflecting, or simply sitting without the need to fill the silence. In these moments, something subtle but powerful happens. The person stops searching for themselves in the reactions of others. They begin to experience who they are directly. And there is something deeply grounding about that experience. Because when someone is comfortable in their own presence, loneliness begins to transform. Solitude is no longer the absence of people. It becomes the presence of self. Have you ever noticed how different silence can feel depending on your relationship with yourself? For some, silence is heavy. For others, it is peaceful. The difference often lies in whether the mind feels like an enemy or a companion. People who enjoy their own company slowly develop a quiet friendship with their own thoughts. They become curious about what they feel, patient with what they discover, and accepting of the complexity within themselves. And this acceptance changes how they move through the world. They do not fear empty rooms. They do not panic when plans fall through. They do not need constant distraction to feel stable. Because wherever they go, they bring their own company with them. This does not mean they reject relationships. In fact, many people who are comfortable alone value connection deeply. But the connection they seek is genuine rather than constant, meaningful rather than frequent. When they spend time with others, it is not because they are escaping loneliness. It is because they genuinely want to share their presence. And that difference creates a quieter, deeper form of connection. The world may continue to move loudly around them, but within their own presence, they have discovered something rare, a calm place to return to. If parts of this reflection felt familiar, if something quiet inside you was gently recognized, you are not alone in experiencing this relationship with solitude. Many people move through the world with a deep inner life that others rarely see. A life filled with reflection, imagination, and quiet understanding. Enjoying your own company does not mean something is missing. Sometimes, it simply means you have discovered something many people are still searching for, comfort within your own presence. If you'd like to stay connected to a space where the hidden patterns of human psychology are explored with care and curiosity, you are always welcome here. And if you feel comfortable sharing your thoughts below, you can. Only if you want to. Sometimes your words might quietly help another person realize that their experience is not unusual. Take care of yourself. You deserve gentleness.